But you know what, Mary Lou, I'll tell you one more thing about this that I think it might be interesting. Part of the flip side of this, you talked about, we were taught to tough it out. I'm from the same generation as you. And, I played national level football. Like there's no crying on the field, right? I was taught you're not even supposed to sit on the field. If you take a knee, the bum never hits the field unless somebody knocks you down. And so, yeah, I totally get that piece. I think we need to start acknowledging something very important. And I think people in my industry are a little bit responsible for this. This digital lifestyle that we've created, this always on digital lifestyle, has negative physiological effects on us. I'm going to talk about this in the book. I'm writing about this right now. But, the way I look at it, I'm an athlete, lifelong athlete, health guy. We have to start considering that what we put in through our eyes and ears will impact your health and your well-being just as much as what you put in through your mouth.
This is the Play Your Position podcast, where we huddle up, call the plays, and inspire you to run your ball into the end zone. Are you ready to score more game-winning touchdowns in your life, business, and career? Then listen up, because it's game time, baby. Now, here's your host, Mary Lou Kaiser.
All right, Team PYP, Mary Lou Kaiser here. Welcome to today's episode of the Play Your Position podcast. It's game day here at PYP, and if you've been hanging around for a while, and I know a lot of you have, you know what game day means. I have got a great guest who is suited up, ready to take the field and lead us through his unique leadership journey. So team, his name is Dan Branco, and he's coming to us today from Toronto, Canada. Dan, are you ready for kickoff?
Yes, I am.
Good.
Flip off? Are we going to flip a coin or?
No, we've already decided who's receiving and who's,
all right.
and who's defending. So team, let me share some things about Dan, and then he's going to take us into his story. So he just was telling me that he played football at a national level for many years and then entered the world of IT and became a leader in the IT industry. Today, he is a chief technology officer for Hire, and he guides medium-sized organizations to aim for remote first, cloud first as a key step toward digital transformation. He helps organizations when they can't keep up with the demands of their stakeholders. One of the reasons CEOs love Dan is because he can speak their language and translate geek speak too. That is a superpower, Dan, and I know you're going to talk about it a little bit. He has tons to share about excelling in multiple fields, and he's also got a great story about how he has overcome lifelong anxiety. He's going to talk about the book that's coming out next year. So, Dan, let's get into your story. Tell us about when you first got the call to leadership. How old were you? What was happening in your life at the time? And then catch us up to what you're doing today and how answering that call has played a role.
Wow, I think, Mary Lou, it started when I was very young. I went to an art school, and in Toronto, it was a famous school. We were performers. We sang, and they would put on shows. We would travel North America and sing for large audiences. I've sang in a lot of the big and major event centers in Canada and some in the US. And so, what I learned in those days was being part of a team, being part of a really, really tight-knit team, and what that meant, the fraternity of that, and the sort of having all of these people sort of focused on a common goal. To me, that was an experience that I think I've been chasing my whole life, to be really honest. It started in music at that school. I later moved on to sports, played football at a national level, like you said. And it was the same thing, I played on a couple championship teams, and there's just an energy, a synergy when you work with people who are on the same page as you. They get you, and everybody's bought into the same mission. Mm-hmm. And progressed throughout my career, got into, I was in technology, worked in the corporate world for a while, worked at one of Canada's biggest companies, biggest retailer. And I was, one of those kinds of overachievers where by the time I was 27 years old, I was sort of a senior director there,
Wow.
running special projects, research and development projects. And I launched one of Canada's first online grocery retailers. And that was back in, I think, early 2000s, 2001,
the old
before
days.
the pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah, before the pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we all became used to online grocery orders. But yeah, and I used to just, I managed a really big team, led a big team, and I just loved it. I loved being the coach. I loved being the person who was driving the vision, the vision downwards with my team. And then the corporate world sort of lost its luster for me.
Sure.
And I made a decision that I was never going to let anybody else be responsible for my happiness ever again.
Ooh, I like that.
So that's when I decided to go into business for myself. And this was about 2008, 2009. And I saw something, and I think this started to emerge in IT first. And this was the idea of working with people remotely. Not an unusual thing. I mean, everybody, back in those days, people were jet setting. There was video conferencing. We were used Skype, right? Like I remember we had these special rooms with cameras and speakers, and like the cameras would look at you when you spoke, all that stuff. It was not that unusual, but it was abnormal, and it was expensive in those days.
Yeah.
But there was this thing happening in IT in those days. And I mean, it had started happening even before those days. There's this global shortage of IT people, and every so often we get, I think there was a recent news cycle about 6 months ago about how Silicon Valley was dumping all of their IT people, layoffs left, right, and center. All the big companies were letting people go. And it seemed like a crisis. But in reality, we've had like a 50% shortage of technology people for like 25 years now. And if you think about it, it's been huge. And if you think about it, it makes sense because we have, as an economy, North America, we have been putting all of our products and services online in one form or another, digitizing everything that we do in one form or another for the last 25 years, since the first .com boom.
Right.
Anything before that, right? So just the information worker of the future is, unfortunately, for some, going to be, I think, people with a lot of technology skills. And technology is going to play a pivotal role, I think, in everything that we do from now on and moving forward. And that's a whole other, that's a big discussion that we can have some other time. But, and so what was happening is, because of this big shortage, we were looking for ways to staff up. And this is when the industry started to look at remote resources. So companies like IBM and Microsoft started building development centers overseas in India, places like India, Ukraine, and China. And so in IT, we became some of the earliest adopters of remote work. And that's where it all started for me. So in 2009, I said, you know what? I'm going to bring remote work and cloud services to medium-sized companies who have never heard of these things before, who have never even thought that this was a possibility for them, because it opens up a world of resources. It opens up a world of opportunities for them to punch above their weight, as we say. Yeah.
Wow. So you really had a vision. You sensed something, and maybe you weren't fully aware of it, but you were certainly on the leading edge of where we find ourselves now, where you and I were talking in the pre-chat about the pandemic forced everybody to be remote, unless you had a job where you couldn't be, like a construction worker, for example, or an airline pilot. There are certain jobs that couldn't and still cannot be remote. But many of the jobs, especially in any kind of tech job and many service-based jobs now, people are not commuting to an office the way we did for decades, right? And it's interesting that here we are on the cusp of 2024 as we record this, and this will air in 2024. And the pandemic is behind us. Are you still seeing resistance by people to adopting the cloud first, remote first strategy, which is really at the foundation of your work? Or did the pandemic really get people to say, yep, this is where we're going and we got to do it?
I think, we're seeing all and everything all over the place. I think we're seeing a lot of companies who are trying to bring people back to the office.
Yes.
And you hear about it all the time. People are talking about it in the media and they're struggling. And then on the other hand, we're seeing companies who, like my company, we ditched our office permanently. And we are trying to figure out how to make it, how to really make it work full-time remotely, even like internally, because we used to have an office. We used to all sit together, but a lot of our team was remote. We had local clients, but we're trying to figure out now how to even take that to the sort of next level. I think another really interesting piece to this whole puzzle is the millennials, because the millennials now make up 35% of our workforce.
Yeah, that's a big chunk.
Yeah. They also make up 21% of consumer spending in North America.
Okay.
So the millennials are a force to be reckoned with. They are quickly replacing the previous generation's grip on the economy and the workforce. And so they've got a list of demands. And I don't think, I know they sort of get dragged through the mud quite a bit, which I don't think is fair at all, because
it's not.
No, I think we've given them, previous generations have handed them a dumpster fire to deal with. and they're like, well, listen, if we're going to handle this, then here's our demands, right?
Yeah, yeah. What are some of the demands that you see consistently?
Well, I think they want work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even like the term work-life balance. They want balance.
Mm-hmm.
And they want meaningful work. They want career growth. They want feedback, regular feedback. They want equality, autonomy, fairness. I mean, the interesting thing is they want all of this stuff that when I went through management training back in the late 90s and early 2000s,
yeah,
when they were teaching us how to be really great managers and coaches, I mean, that was the stuff that they were telling us we should give our employees.
Mm-hmm.
But it was always very difficult because of corporate policies and politics and all that stuff. So the millennials are hitting the workforce saying, hey, we want this stuff and we're not going to accept it anymore. We're not going to accept alternatives. And so now, like I'm hearing stories from people, companies are making, are trying to literally pay people, making them huge salary offers to just come into the office, and people are saying no.
Yeah, it's not worth it.
Yeah. When you start considering the cost of employment, which is something a lot of people don't talk about, it starts to make a lot of sense. And the millennials, I think, have watched their parents, I think, get squeezed by the machine a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The way things, all of our stock options and all of our retirement pension plans and all those things kept getting sort of under the sort of pressure, the corporate pressure to be outsourced or downsized. I think they saw all that, and now they're saying, well, yeah, we're going to build a different kind of workforce that's going to operate a little bit different. And I think the pandemic was like that was the start for them. That it gave them the edge. And now I think now that they have that advantage, I don't think they're going to give it up.
Yeah. I've had conversations on this show with people who are also leading forward into remote first or other options than a giant skyscraper in the middle of a city. Yeah. And, you live in Toronto, which is an epicenter of finance and commerce and everything for the world. It's a hugely international city. And I'm outside of New York City right now, same thing. And if you go into a city, any big city, and you're going to see all these buildings, many of them now have large vacancies because of the pandemic. And some companies who I think are forward thinking are saying, no, we're done. Like, I mean, your company is small, Dan, but you made the decision. We're not going to have a brick and mortar place anymore. And then, yes, I have friends who work for very large global companies where the return to work has now been mandated. You will come in, and boy, is there a lot of pushback. But it's to the point now. I think we're in a really interesting time. And what you're doing is so important because you have a perspective that a lot of people don't. Just because you have been working remotely for as long as you have, you know the upsides. You also know the downsides. And I wanted to ask you, how do you effectively lead a remote team when you aren't in the same room or the same building, where you have those human interactions, the little jokes, the, hey, how's it going? I mean, yes, you and I are talking over Zoom. We can see each other. It's not the same as being in the same room with one another. And so I'm curious, as somebody who is very invested in teaching companies about cloud first, remote first, where's the leadership in here?
Yeah.
How do you do it?
Well, I'll start with the hard parts. And I think you nailed the hard part, building culture. Building culture is a challenge, right? Because you don't have those water cooler moments. And so that's, I think, the biggest challenge for all leaders who are trying to do this. How do you maintain culture? And there's stuff that works. I think turning your cameras on, getting dressed. I make a point of putting on a proper shirt and getting dressed as if I'm from the office. I turn my camera on and I try to do something fun for the team, something inspirational. Maybe I'll share something that I've been working on, some research I've been doing, something that I've been writing, this podcast. I try to create some shared culture. And it's interesting, especially when we talk about millennials, you don't have to go too deep. These are people who are used to interacting with people digitally. And so I think, because you're not in the same room with them, there's definitely going to be a different flavor, but I think you can still create meaningful connections with people remotely. So that's the hard part. At least the hard part, for me, I think that's the hard part. I mean, the easy parts are, there's two pieces you got to remember. You have to change the way you do business. And I think this is the biggest thing that all of these companies who are trying to mandate people back to the office, I think they are hooked on a management style, and it might be specifically at the middle levels that just don't know how to change. They don't know how to accommodate this new style. And so what I think the best description of it that I've ever heard is we have to transition from synchronous workflows to asynchronous workflows.
What does that mean for people who may not have heard those terms before?
Yeah. So the idea is, a typical workflow would be, Mary Lou, you're my boss. You want me to fill out that TPS report,
oh, no.
right? And so you're gonna call me. We're gonna have a phone call. You're gonna explain it to me, or maybe we're gonna have a meeting. I mean, there's cultures out there where we would probably have several emails, and then several emails to set up a phone call, and then a couple phone calls to set up a meeting, and then we would bring about $700,000 worth of people into a meeting to discuss the value of the TPS report. There's probably still some companies out there who, there's some poor person who is tasked with creating a 50-page PowerPoint, all of that stuff. That's called synchronous workflow. It's like, there's like step 1 to step 100, and they all have to happen in order, and and everybody needs to sign off, and everybody needs to be involved. Get rid of that. It's got to go. It's over.
Yeah, it's over. Game over long ago.
That's right.
The final whistle blew and we are done.
Yeah. It's like, they're. Yeah. So the new approach is creating systems where the work gets assigned asynchronously. So I can assign something to you, and all of the things that you need to know in order to get that thing done is there, or accessible to you. It's intuitive. You understand how to use the system, and the system is set up to track your work. It's there to set up to track your feedback. All of this stuff happens online in an organized system, so that you're not spending your time trying to figure out how to appease me. I'm not wasting my time trying to figure out how to get you to do this. We just both agree on how the system works, and the system handles it for us. So,
it's beautiful.
It's
I
work.
see. I like that. Now I understand what you were saying earlier, that this new way of working is threatening to people who have done it a certain way for so long, and that's what's familiar. It's comfortable, even if it's not effective. It doesn't matter that there's such people say, "Oh, I want to change," and then when you tell them, "Well, this is what you're going to have to do to get what you say you want," no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep it like it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a fear of letting go,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Because I'm a recovering micromanager. And so
I like that you're honest.
and if you're like me, you go, well, listen, if I'm not on top of these people cracking whips and lighting fires, nothing's going to get done. And that's the piece you got to let go of. The system you build has to build that accountability, or has to handle the accountability for you. Right. So that means clear expectations on when things need to be done and delivered, and a measurement of success. And then your job as a leader is to manage the numbers, right? Is someone delivering on time? What's their score like? A lot of this stuff is not new. A lot of forward-thinking companies, I know Microsoft is one of them. They used to be a client of mine. They've been doing this for 20 years. In fact, they're starting to transcend this and move on to even more sophisticated systems.
Well, AI, they're really getting in the AI game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like, when you think of it from a basic leadership perspective, setting expectations and following up on those expectations, creating metrics that you can measure and track.
Right.
It's all pretty standard stuff. We're just taking all of those concepts and we're creating an online system so that you can effectively work with people who are working remotely.
Yeah. Now, do you and your company, your team, Dan, do you build customized systems for people, or do you consult and say, hey, based on what you are saying you want to get done, this is the system we think would be the best one for you to implement? What is your role in consulting and coaching people who are making this switch or feel overwhelmed by having a remote first, cloud first approach?
Right. So I do a lot of coaching, a lot of consulting with companies who want to do, and it's coaching. I think honestly, companies hire me as a CTO because they want somebody to handle the tech. And what's interesting is where I end up finding myself 6 months in is I'm the therapist.
Exactly.
I'm working with the management team, and we're like, but I don't understand. And they're like, there's power struggles, and there's self-doubt. There's all this
imposter syndrome, all that.
All of it. Yeah. And so we got to work through all that stuff. And I think that's the valuable work. Personally, that's the work I enjoyed the most.
Yeah.
On the company that I own a software company named GSI Solutions. We and that's kind of we do the tooling side of that stuff. So we, dashboards, data, we do all of the stuff related to collecting your data, tracking it, letting you report on and build metrics around it, that kind of stuff, integration into other systems that you might have to work with, and those kinds of things.
Okay.
It's halftime here at the Play Your Position podcast, and we've got ourselves a great game. While you're up grabbing another snack and topping off your favorite beverage, make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss another play. PYP is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever great podcasts can be found. Now, let's get back to the game.
Now, is there a particular industry or niche that you have found yourself in over and over again? Say, like, do you work with manufacturing companies, or are you more in maybe service-based organizations? Is there some kind of company that you have served or like to serve?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I've been asking myself that a lot. We're starting to do a lot more marketing, and we're trying to figure that piece out. We've been in business 14 years.
Yeah.
I've been doing this a long time. And what's interesting, it seems to be more the size of company than vertical. It seems to be every company gets to a stage where they need to pivot and they need to figure out how to do stuff like this, especially in the tech world. that's, but I've worked with other consulting companies. I've worked with finance companies. I've worked with auto manufacturers. I've worked with big tech companies like eBay and Microsoft. It's interesting. And sometimes it's a team, sometimes it's a specific business unit. But at the end of the day, it's like this, it's like a time and a place. And the team or the organization will get to this place and they'll say, we don't know where to go from here. We don't know how to scale. We don't know how to change our approach. And that's usually when they bring, somehow they find me and I usually help them out with that sort of stuff.
Great. That's helpful. I mean, for listeners who are trying to wrap their head around what it is you do and why it matters. I like that you identified there's that point where a company realizes we aren't going to go anywhere the way we are. We have to do something else. And it's that scaling, it's that systemization and being willing to step into remote, and cloud, which I've heard people, it's so beyond their comprehension of how it works. And people like you, Dan, seem like magicians a lot of the time because it is not technology for as sophisticated and as ubiquitous as it has become. I mean, we all have a smartphone now, which is one of the greatest technological inventions of all time. And most of us don't know. We may be using 2% of its capability. We're on Instagram, we're emailing, we're texting, and maybe calling. Although, to your point about the younger generations, calling is not call somebody. I'm just going to text them or snap them or DM, right? It's all this new language that has come into play. And so I'm curious, what's the book you're working on? What is it about?
Oh, the book's an interesting one. It's a creative project that I started during the pandemic, and I still haven't gotten to the point of recovering from being an overachiever, but I am starting to acknowledge that I'm an overachiever. So I have this desperate need to be moving and doing something constantly. So when I found myself in lockdown during the pandemic, and things had really slowed down at work. Clients were completely checked out. Nobody was doing anything. We were just keeping the lights on at that point.
Yep.
And so I started getting antsy. What am I going to do with myself? And it's a very personal story. I had quite a very traumatic experiences when I was young.
Mm-hmm.
Developed an anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of people are struggling with anxiety right now, thanks to the pandemic and just the sort of general uncertain state of the world. And so, for me, it had become, I had managed it over the years in a, one way or another, as one does. Lots of antacids and lots of Pepto-Bismol and all that stuff. But I had, during the pandemic, it had really hit a point where I said, I need to do something about this. And so what I did was I developed a practice. And I started saying, I said, well, okay, so what do I have to work with? Because that's one of my big things as well, is like, work with what you got. We were locked up at home and there wasn't a whole lot of access to people who could help. And so I did what I normally do. I started reading. I realized, I said, I had this really deep fascination with Eastern philosophy, Hinduism, Buddhism. And I was like, when people were really, in the old days, when people were struggling with, mental disorders or, anything, anxiety or they would go away for convalescence. They would go to a quiet place and they would sort of rest and detach from the world and see and recover. And I said, well, I have that right here. There's nothing to do. I'm locked up at home. All four of us are here in the house and it's quiet and we live in a quiet neighborhood. So I said, I'm going to take some of these Eastern practices and I'm going to start experimenting, see if I can find something that's going to work. And so I started living this very monastic lifestyle for about a year and a half. And I know there's a lot of people who talk about meditation right now. I mean, you can throw a pebble into the internet and get about 12 people talking about meditation, right? And
Yes.
so I said, well, and I had read a whole bunch of books on Buddhism and meditation. So let me try that. And it wasn't really for me because I can't sit still and I just can't sit still.
Mm-hmm.
But I kept working with it and I kept working with it. And over time, I developed a practice that was starting to work for me. And I won't give away too much, but it's, the book is going to talk about the system that I developed, how it came to be. And there's going to be, and then there's the story behind all of it where it really talks about some of the traumatic childhood events that I went through.
Sure.
And sort of how I've applied some of these principles throughout my whole life, in fact, all the way through my corporate life and my sort of athletic life and all those things. And then there's a fairly, I guess, a cliffhanger. It's the book is kind of like this hero's journey of sorts. And then at the very end of the book, when I had to face my Darth Vader in the cave kind of thing.
Yes.
And it was the passing of my sister after her battle with cancer she fought cancer for about 10 years. So, I think in honor of her, I came up with this idea of writing this book about this journey that I went through and how I was able to take all of these sort of different philosophies and patch them all together and build something that really worked for me. And I can say, I think for the first time in 35 years, I'm anxiety free, which is kind of
that is fantastic.
Yeah,
that is, and I love that it's a personal journey. I'm, of course, condolences about your sister. That is so hard to lose somebody, and especially if it's a long battle, and it's a roller coaster. And I love that you were inspired to share some vulnerabilities about your life, the trauma that you experienced as a young person, and also being candid about anxiety. Because, yes, lots of talk about meditation today, apps out the yin yang about, here's our meditation app. And the bottom line is, I think because of the internet, more and more people are coming forward and beginning to talk about it. I mean, mental health, mental illness, all that stuff is still very uncomfortable for a lot of people. The younger generations, going back to millennials and our Gen Zers, this has been their world. So they're very able to say, having a mental health day, peace out, right? Whereas those of us, and I'm a Gen Xer, and anybody above, a boomer or a senior boomer, that's not. I mean, I grew up with messages of you tough it out. Mm-hmm. Get over yourself. There were really no resources at all for anybody who was struggling with depression, anxiety, certainly ADHD. I mean, any kind of thing that wasn't that very narrow definition of here's what normal is. And normal is first of all, I don't want to be considered normal because that's boring. I like being different. And I like that here you are, an IT professional who's built some businesses, sold some businesses, end up becoming a coach and a therapist versus the guy. I love that you're going to tell your story and it's coming out. I think we need more of those. And you're showing, hey, this is what worked for me and it might work for you.
Yeah.
Right? That's fantastic. And so you're saying you're thinking the summer of 2024 is about your goal at this point?
That's the idea. Yeah, we're in action right now. But you know what, Mary Lee, I'll tell you one more thing about this that I think it might be interesting.
Yeah.
Part of the flip side of this, you talked about, we were taught to tough it out. I'm from the same generation as you. And, hey, I played national level football. Like there's no crying on the field, right?
There's no crying in football.
Yeah. I was taught you're not even supposed to sit on the field. If you take a knee, the bum never hits the field unless somebody knocks you down. And so, yeah, I totally get that piece. I think we need to start acknowledging something very important. And I think people in my industry are a little bit responsible for this. This digital lifestyle that we've created, this always on digital lifestyle, has negative physiological effects on us. And I'm going to talk about this in the book. I'm writing about this right now. But the way I look at it, I'm an athlete, lifelong athlete, health guy. We have to start considering that what we put in through our eyes and ears will impact your health and your well-being just as much as what you put in through your mouth.
100%.
Yeah. And so I talk about that in the book. And I think a big part of my practice, a big part of this method that I'm going to talk about is how to acknowledge that, how to recognize some of the things, how to start recognizing some of the signs, that maybe you need to take a bit of a break, maybe you need to slow down. And the idea behind the method is really to start recovering, or at least trying to turn back some of the damage caused by that always on lifestyle.
Yeah, always on we weren't built for that. The human brain, the human body. I mean, even sitting for a full day in front of a screen, which millions of people do. I mean, certainly you have with the work that you do, is causing so many problems, mentally certainly, but physiologically as well. I've heard it said that sitting is equivalent to the new smoking.
Yeah.
It's the new smoking, right? Like the effects of sitting all day. People get up in the morning, they get into their cars, or they used to. But even if you work from home and a remote lifestyle, if the demand is you're going to be on the Zoom calls all day, which I know some companies tried to take what happened in the brick and mortar and then plug it into the Zoom. And you and I both know that doesn't work. I remember during the pandemic, I remember Zoom fatigue. I used to try to do 4 conversations from this podcast one day a week. And I remember doing it for maybe a month. I said, I can't do that anymore. It's too taxing on my body, my brain. I'm exhausted. I just felt, so I'm glad that you're addressing the elephant in the room, that yes, technology is great. It's brought us all kinds of capabilities that didn't exist. It's opened up enormous opportunities for people. But at the same time, don't forget, you're a biological being.
Yeah.
You got to take care of yourself. It's a great message.
I think this book for me was a creative project. It was a gift, I think, that I wanted to give my sister, my late sister. And so for me, it's just, I'm trying to have as much fun with it as I can. Try to give something that I think try to write something that will be useful for people. And, I was talking to my team this week, and I think my goal is really, if I could help one person, it'll be well worth the effort.
Yeah. Yeah. That is the right reason to do it. So that's wonderful. And so team, I'm going to have links for Dan on his show notes page at pyppodcast.com. And obviously his book is not out yet, but keep an eye out for it, because if you know somebody in your life who struggles with anxiety or feels this pressure to always be on and never slow down and rest and recover, Dan's story may be a great gift for somebody or for yourself. And so we'll keep our eyes out for that, because that is, we're still, like I said, we're recording this at the end of 2023. But I'll tell you, June or summer of 2024 is going to be here before we know it. And for people who'd like to know more about you now, Dan, as a CTO and as somebody who can go in and work with companies on transitioning from what you were describing, the chaos of the old ways, into an asynchronous environment that frees people up and gives them more flexibility, where do you hang out online?
The best thing to do is to probably connect with me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And also my website, which is www.branco.ca. And that's my last name.ca, branco.ca.
Great. Yeah. So team, those links will definitely be on his show notes page. And, Dan is somebody who, as you can tell, he's very wise. And what I like about you, Dan, is you have that element of fun about you, because IT can be intimidating to a lot of people. And it is mysterious. We take for granted the fact that we're sitting I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. All the brains that have gone into my ability to sit here and talk to you is staggering. From the developers of my microphone to the creators of the computer to the people who wrote the code for Zoom and how it operates, and the little Logitech camera that I can, you see me and I'm seeing you. LinkedIn, because that's how we were connected. So all the brains behind putting that platform together, it's staggering, right? We're so interdependent. And I think that's one of the things about remote work. It's both freeing, but it also can feel isolating. So as we come towards the end of this amazing conversation today, could you talk about what are some ways that people can prevent feeling disconnected in a world that is saying, yeah, remote's possible, guys, and more of us are going to it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the best thing I can do is tell you what I do. And so I spend, a big chunk of my day sitting in front of screens like this, talking to people and trying to create connections. But, and then I try to dedicate as much time as I can to do the opposite. And so I start my day every day outside going for a walk. I try to walk 10K a day. And I run into people and I try to make, I try to smile and I try to make friends and I try to create connections and I try to create connections wherever I go. And I think a big part of that, and some of the things that I try to coach people on is, the connection that you're looking for, maybe that's not going to be at work, right? Like maybe your job is to be the very best person who can create those TPS reports that keep that company running.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. You don't necessarily need to be, the other stuff that feeds your soul, the creativity and the innovation and the stuff that gets you, that gets you excited. Maybe that's not for you. Maybe that you're not getting that from work. There's other ways to get it. You can go find it, go make some connections somewhere. I think people are hungry to start connecting again. And I think, there's definitely opportunity. But I will say, I'll wrap things up. I hopefully we don't go too long, but I think we are also at the precipice of a very interesting change in our world where we are seeing a lot of people finding ways to make a living being 100% authentic and real online. And,
Yes.
and that goes from, the YouTuber who's, I don't even get it half the time, but they see an audience and they're just being them, right? I watch these people and they're just being them and they're being weird and neat and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And I think it's wonderful. I watch I love engineering, being an engineer. There's people out there who they just build crazy machines and they do crazy things, put it online. I love watching that stuff. All the way to, you can be this lifelong IT professional who can write a book about how to, optimize your life and tackle anxiety and all those kinds of things. And, you can find people online who are super interested in that. Like I said, the millennials, they're the first generation that is fully digital native. They make up a huge part of our economic buying power and a huge part of our workforce. They're going to reshape our entire economy. And I think there's tons of opportunity for everybody to find some real satisfaction in life and in work by doing their own thing and finding where they fit in.
I love that message. And I'm right there with you. Every generation gets maligned in the media because it sells ads. I mean, let's just be honest. So it's easy to come down hard on the generation that seems different from your own. And the beautiful thing is that each generation does bring gifts to everybody else. And the millennials, like you said, definitely are reshaping as we speak. And I also love that you are encouraging listeners to be authentic in yourself. And that's one of my goals here at PYP is to have conversations like we're having that's real. And we get into who knows what, I don't ever have an agenda when I sit down with somebody. And you shared some amazing stories with us today, Dan, about your personal life, about your work life, about the world and what you see. And there's value in that because we're all changing together, whether you like it or not, right?
Yeah.
And so as we wrap things up, let's end with you sharing a couple of books that have been instrumental to you in your life, maybe on your leadership journey, or perhaps have nothing to do with that. They were just books that made a difference to you personally.
Yeah, it's a great question. I like to tell people we all stand on the shoulders of giants. Nobody does it alone. So the probably the one book that comes up over and over and over again that I share, I often will buy cases of these books and give them out at the holidays. And it's David Allen's Getting Things Done.
Okay.
And if you haven't heard of GTD, I think, and if you're trying to be an entrepreneur, you're trying to run a business remotely, and you're, dealing with lots and lots and lots of inputs, and you have to produce a lot of outputs, you need to look at Getting Things Done. It is a philosophy. It's on one level, it's not a self-help system, but an organizational system.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of them out there, and we get bombarded with them all the time. But what I like about David's book is it's also a philosophy, and you can take his philosophy and you can apply it in any way that you think could fit in your life.
I love it. Okay. So I will put a link to that book on your show notes page. Is there another one that you like, or is that your coup de grace?
That's the coup de grace. But I'll tell you now, I've got a stack of books. It's hard for me to say, what I like and what I not like, because I go through about 60 books a year.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah.
But right now I'm all in on coaching books, anything that I can find related to coaching. Because one of the things that I'm finding is I'm trying to take a coaching first approach to dealing with all of my clients and my employees.
I love it.
And I'm telling you, it pays off. Ask more questions, listen more, speak less, works well in a remote world. And that's what the coaching world's all about. So that's where I'm spending my time right now.
All right. Well, Dan, this has been fantastic. Thank you for making time to come on the Play Your Position podcast, share your story, and inspire us to think about what we're doing both remotely and in person. And as the world turns, it's great. I wish you all the best with your book launch and the journey that you're on to help transform the world. It's been great.
I've enjoyed myself, Mary Lou. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Hey team, Mary Lou here. Who's number one in football changes from year to year. Fashion trends come and go, same with musical tastes. But leadership skills, they never go out of style. In fact, these days, leadership is an essential survival skill for a world that demands more from us than ever before. To succeed these days, you need to know how to show up for yourself so that you can then do the work you love with people you like the way you want. The Play Your Position Leadership Playbook helps you do this, and it's free. Go to pyppodcast.com to download your copy today. If being more successful this year, next year, in the 21st century is on your to-do list, get your copy of the Play Your Position Leadership Playbook now. pyppodcast.com. It's at the top of the page. You can't miss it. That's pyppodcast.com, and start being more of the leader you are meant to be today. This podcast was produced by Daniel Romeros. Show notes for this episode can be found over at pyppodcast.com. I'm Mary Lou Kaiser. Thanks for listening.
Here at the Play Your Position podcast, we believe that the road to self-mastery and a life well lived starts with answering the call to leadership. That's when the fun really begins. Send this episode to any friends who might need to hear the inspiration and ideas you heard today. And feel free to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform.